be worth 2 pennies.
Happy Monday. Woo! Is this everybody? Kind of? Not too big of a class? Just about this size? Sweet. Let's talk about some macroeconomics. What did you guys talk about last time? Chapter 9, right? Anyone remember anything? Anything out of it? I looked over the book a little bit. You did some circular flow models. You remember that? Anything else? Maybe did some supply and demand towards the end. Well, today we are going to get into chapter 10, which is dynamic change and economic fluctuations, and we're going to talk about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So it should be fun. We're going to take some notes. We're going to go over this chapter over 2 days. We split it kind of in half, chapter 10, because I think your homework is due Wednesday, right? Or is that personal finance? That's personal finance. Your homework isn't due Wednesday? All right. we don't have homework. All right. Well, let's get into some important stuff here. We're in chapter 10. To start the chapter and outline some stuff that's going to be important as we talk about different factors that change aggregate demand and aggregate supply, we need to know what anticipated change is. An anticipated change is a change that is foreseen by decision makers in time for them to make adjustments. And then we also have unanticipated change. Does anyone know what an unanticipated change would be? We got anticipated change up there on the board. It's a change that is foreseen by decision makers in time for them to make an adjustments. All we're adding is un, so what would be an unanticipated change? What do you think the definition is? Was it? Yeah. It could be that. It's a change that decision makers could not reasonably foresee. They cannot reasonably foresee it. And does anyone, let me write that on the board. A change that decision makers could not reasonably foresee. And then I put, in my definition, I put catch people, sorry my handwriting's bad, by surprise. Does anyone have any examples of unanticipated changes that happen in the world? Catch people by surprise? Go ahead.
Death.
What was that? Death, yeah. That could catch someone by surprise for sure. Any surprises in the economy though? Let's talk about the economy as a whole. Yeah. Yeah, inflation and stuff like that. A little bit unforeseen. Maybe Ukraine invading Russia and making the gas prices go up. Well, other things like that, it could be new products. Technological discoveries. And I got one more, but I'll try to have you guys guess it. In agriculture, what can happen that's unforeseeable? People don't see it happening. There's multiple answers to this actually. In agriculture, what could happen that people don't foresee, can't see in the future, can't see it happening?
A drought.
A drought, perfect. That's exactly the answer I was looking for, a drought. No one can tell when a drought's gonna happen. You don't really know. It's unforeseeable, you can't really plan for it. It catches people by surprise. Maybe a natural disaster could happen or something like that. So we just needed these two definitions of anticipated change and unanticipated change. So you guys can now use those as we talk about factors that shift aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And I'll have Luke take over that first section if he wants.
Okay. So first, for the aggregate demand, we're gonna just start with the graph of what we're gonna be dealing with. So we're gonna be dealing with price level on our y-axis. And then we have real GDP, which is just finished goods. That's what aggregate demand is. So we have just real GDP, which is the total of all finished goods in our economy. Right? So then our aggregate demand curve is going to look something like this. As our baseline. All right, so the aggregate demand, just as a reminder, is the total demand of all finished goods in the economy. And so we're going to look at all the different factors that could shift our demand, aggregate demand curve either to the right or to the left. So first we have a change in wealth. So most of the ownership or the wealth in the U.S. is from stocks and housing. So if we have a big increase of everyday people being able to buy houses or buy stocks, overall the wealth of our country would be higher. Would you agree to that? Everyone following there? So if we have an increase in wealth here within the United States, we should see an increase in our aggregate demand. So we have an increase in wealth, we should see an increase in aggregate demand. So on our graph here, our country's getting wealthier, so we should see a shift like this, where it's shifting to the right and getting higher up. And so if we had a price level, say our long run aggregate supply, which we'll get to here in a little bit, is here. Our initial price level was here, what we're paying for whatever good that we have. And now our price level is down here, receiving the same amount of goods as before. Does that make sense to everyone so far? Any questions on this first factor that shifts our aggregate demand? Say we got poorer, our change in wealth would be the opposite. So say our wealth went down, our aggregate demand would be shifting the other direction. Is this right? Did I shift it right?
You put this is 0. So we had an increase in wealth, and so we shifted price up. We went from aggregate demand 0 to aggregate demand 1 on our demand curve. And if there was a decrease in wealth, we would shift the other way. The demand curve would be shifted inwards, which would be a decrease in price.
Any questions on the first one so far? Alright, so the second factor, we have change in real interest rate.
What's important about a low interest rate? There's something important. When there's low interest rates, what's it mean for people like us? What can we do with lower interest rates?
We save money.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You don't have to pay as much, really.
Yep. So yeah, that's a big one. It makes it makes it cheaper for consumers to buy major appliances, automobiles, houses, stuff like that. And that's going to come in handy when we talk about a change in real interest rates. So when the interest rates are low, what are we going to go out and do? We're going to go buy some stuff, right? Same with investment companies. They can now borrow money cheaper at a low interest rate. And so big projects, when the interest rates are low, companies tend to go after those big projects, new factories, new stuff like that, because they don't have to pay as much money back. You can keep going on it and show them on the curve what happens.
Okay. So say we're now, I want to get rid of the.
Get rid of the long run.
That's what I want to get rid of too.
Here. Woo. So yeah, erase the whole center there.
Alright, so now we have lower interest rates, and now everyone can basically afford to get a loan to get another house or get a car. We have these low interest rates. It's incentivizing our demand, which would be us, the consumers, to go out and get more loans. So this is going to shift even further out. So I feel like we should be going further. So now we have another shift further out to the right.
A key thing, so right on number 2, what's something I would put under 2? Luke, you put this. Low interest rates shift the aggregate demand to the right. People want to buy more, which means demand is going to increase. With lower interest rates, demand increases. A higher interest rates makes consumption more expensive, so higher interest rates make the demand curve shift left. And a leftward shift this way, if we drew another demand curve right there, left side, that's a decrease in demand because interest rates are higher and people don't want to buy goods. It's more expensive for you to buy that new car. It's more expensive for you to get a new dishwasher. So you're going to save and wait for interest rates to go low. And then number 3, I'll have Luke put up there. It's changes in the expectations of businesses and households about future direction of the economy. Just to restart on this one. For each one, we just redraw. Okay. And something really important about this one before we get started, while Luke writes the changes of expectations of business and stuff, we need to know what the consumer sentiment index is. And it is a measure of optimism of consumers based on their responses to a set of questions about their current and expected future personal economic situation.
So I wanted to consider where we are right now in our economy. So just kind of take a poll from class. How is everyone feeling? Is anyone feeling optimistic in our current economy in the future? Seen no's? Does that like go for everyone? Yeah. So what would we expect our aggregate demand to shift? How would we expect it to move in response to how we're feeling in regards to our economy in the future? We expect to shift to the left or to the right? For considering this here.
Yeah, I'll pick on something in a second.
We're
I
gonna do.
might reword it for him. But
Okay, go ahead.
yeah. So how our state of the economy is right now, we're talking about the economy, aggregate demand, demand of people in the economy to buy things. If our state of the economy right now, and we're thinking about how it's going, with gas prices going up and other things happening, other factors that we should see, maybe unforeseen ones, how do we expect the demand curve to shift in today's world? You guys said the economy's not looking good, right, in the future? So that's what we're going with, right? Okay, that means we're pessimistic. We're pessimistic about how the economy is going to look in our future, right? And if we're pessimistic, do we want to go out and buy things? Is the demand going to be high? Is it going to increase? Probably not. So where would the demand curve shift with this factor that's shifting the demand curve? It would shift left, right? Good, thank you. And so what I put in my notes is pessimism, which is being pessimistic about the future, leads to a decline in aggregate demand, and it shifts it left. And optimism, which is the exact opposite, shifts the demand curve to the right. So if in a different situation, different world, if we're expecting the economy to be able to boom and stuff, our demand is going to go to the right. We're going to be optimistic about what's happening. But right now we're a little pessimistic is what we are. We're scared that there might be a recession, or scared that we might have something. So demand for goods is kind of low. So we expect right now that our curve would look like that. We started off right here at zero, I mean, because your book does 0, then 1. We started off at 0, and we saw that we might be a little pessimistic for expected demand, and so we shift that leftward for number 3. And then actually we can show you, so this consumer sentiment index is actually ran each year by, I think it's University of Michigan. It's actually pretty sweet how much they've, oh, I need to turn this bad boy on. I don't know if it turned on. Is there a light on there?
Yeah, it's
Ah, it's good. Yeah, I see a light bulb on. Can't mute the video because they got it bad. But yeah, this index, it'll pop up here in just a second. Oh. See light flickering. That's all I know. See the light inside. It's weird. How do I get this? Well, here is the consumer sentiment index. That index I had you define before we talked about the third factor. I just wanted to show you how kind of cool it looks. They factor this in. They do a survey with hundreds of households, and they ask, like, how's your current situation? How do you think your current situation is going to be, right? And then if we see all these dark places, what happened in 2008, around 2008? Does anyone know? We're all old enough. What happened in 2008 in the economy? Your parents went through it. We didn't personally go through it. We were all kids in 2008. A recession, yeah. What happened in the recession? Has to go with the housing market. Does anyone remember the housing bubble burst?
I think
Biggest recession.
Yeah, I think like to buy a house it was like really high.
Yeah. A whole lot of stuff happened, and we went to one of our biggest recessions since the Great Depression, and we can see that on this index right here, the households called it. They had a survey, and consumers called it, and they were pessimistic, and it shows that the demand went down. So it's just a cool little thing that all the different times we had a recession or something, people's pessimistic there, and then optimism, demand would go up in these white sections. After 2008, when we come out and we're building up, the economy is optimistic right now, and that means demand would shift right. That's all we got to show you on this fun little thing.
Any questions on factors 1, 2, 3? For demand, aggregate demand. Questions?
Yeah,
on
these are just shifters of aggregate demand. That's all we're talking about. We'll get to supply here in a second. This is just the demand curve and the factors that shift it. Any questions on these first 3? There's 6 of them. All right, you can draw the next one, right? The next one's over here. The next one's number 4. I'll have Luke write it up there. It's a change in the expected rate of inflation. Change in the expected rate of inflation. That's number 4. What's inflation? That's a good start to get off on this factor. Anyone? You guys have all been through the economic courses. Have you already talked about it this year, probably? Yeah? Anyone know what inflation is? Or even how to measure it? What's the number between 1 and 7? 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have no idea? No idea what inflation is?
No, I just said unfortunately.
You did what? Alright, do you know what inflation is? I hate the random number generator. I hated it when I was in Russ's classes, but I'm bringing it today.
It's the rate of when prices increase.
Yeah.
Over a period of time.
Yeah, so prices are increasing, basically. Inflation. How do you measure it? You guys remember that? Go to the grocery store. Maybe that's a hint.
Oh, it's like the
price.
the new minus old divided by the old, right? Or something like that.
Yeah?
Is that it?
That's finding the price change over.
Yeah.
Oh, price change.
That's basically, you're basically the same thing. You're finding the price change over a certain period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, but the prices of goods change, and we calculate that by the same amount of goods we can fit in a grocery cart one year, and then the prices are increased this year, and the inflation, basically. So when consumers and investors believe the rate of inflation will go up, they have an incentive to spend now, right? Which shifts the demand curve to the right. What happens if inflation is expected to decline? For the demand side. Because inflation also affects the supply side. If inflation is expected to decline, what are consumers going to do? It's expected, that's the key word, expected. Expected to increase, expected to decline. Inflation. Prices. What was that? Yeah. So when inflation increases, they have an incentive to spend more, which shifts the demand curve to the right. And if they have an incentive to wait for the lower prices, so inflation is expected to decline, they have an incentive to wait and for the lower prices before buying. So that shifts the demand of the curve to the left.
Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions on that? Okay. Number 5, we have a change in income abroad. So if we're considering the wealth of other nations as well in our aggregate demand, how do you think this would correlate with our consumers and our finished goods? So say Russia has some connections to us in certain industries, but not a lot. So if we're talking more industries that have to do with net exports and imports, and so we're probably going to deal with countries that are closer to us geologically. So for that, we're going to look at like Mexico, Canada, and look at the wealth increase of them. They're having increase in wealth, then we would expect them to have an increase in exports. They're going to buy our goods more often because they're wealthier off. So what we're going to see here is that we're going to have an increase of wealth of whatever nation, and say we have a trading partnership with them, we would expect to see an increase in exports, which in turn would increase our aggregate demand.
vice versa the other way. If Mexico or Canada, they're not wealthy, they're experiencing something in their country that makes their wealth go down, they're not going to export as much from the US. They don't want our stuff because they can't afford it right now, which means aggregate demand is going to go down. Does that one make sense on the shifts for demand in another country?
Okay. Our last aggregate demand shifter changes in exchange rates. So on this one, we're going to be dealing with the dollar value. And if our dollar increases value, so it's worth more in relativity to the most common is the euro now. But it's worth, our dollar is worth more in comparison to the euro. And that causes what for our exports or imports? If we have an increase in dollar value, is that going to make imports cheaper or more expensive for the United States? So we're buying goods from other countries or importing. Increase? So we're going to say that our goods going to get more expensive? What are you saying? Buy more stuff? So yeah, in essence, we're going to have cheaper goods imported to the US. Because our dollar's worth more, so we can get more goods. So yeah, you were correct. That's going to lead to our exported goods. Our exported goods become more expensive. Yeah, for other countries. So basically it's going to be more expensive for other countries to buy US goods. Because the value of our dollar is increased, and therefore all the prices of an Apple laptop would increase. Because it's worth more now. This leads to a decrease of net exports, which is just exports minus imports. And then lastly, what effect do you guys think it would have on our aggregate demand? Would you know that? On your 1 through 6? Is 6, right?
Yeah, just do like 6 from right there with the white line.
Did you go from
Just go this way, go this way. Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Alright. Sorry. Tough luck.
Tough luck.
I hit it too.
Yeah.
So, following this logic here, we have depreciation of our dollar value, so it gets worth more. We have, it becomes cheaper to get goods imported to the US, and then it becomes more expensive for other countries to get our goods because it's worth more worldwide now, which results in net exports decreasing. So we have more imports than we do exports at that point. Where would you think that would end up for our aggregate demand? It's either increase or decrease. You got 50-50 chance here. But I want to kind of hear your logic behind it too.
I'm gonna go with
Decrease? And why do you say that?
just seem like it would decrease.
Give me something else. Give me some fruit.
I don't know. I really don't.
Because you're right. It would decrease our aggregate demand. Right guess. You want to explain more?
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Well, you can do if you want.
Really focus. Because it's a lot harder.
What are you trying to explain again? Why it decreases the aggregate demand?
Why at the very end it's talking about the net imports.
Okay.
So I wrote all that down for a reason.
That's all I have.
Yeah, it says this decline in net exports will reduce aggregate demand, shifting the curve to the left. The opposite can be true if the dollar depreciates, effectively the opposite. With the value of the dollar falling, foreign produced goods become more expensive for U.S. consumers, whereas the U.S. produced goods become cheaper for foreigners. This is precisely what happened during the 2003 to 2007 period, when the dollar depreciated about 15% relative to the euro and several other major currencies. When the dollar depreciates, imports will tend to fall and exports rise. In turn, this increases the net exports, will stimulate aggregate demand in the United States, shifting aggregate demand curve to the right. So what I'm gathering from that is that we're not going to see, when we have the dollar value increase or appreciate, our goods become cheaper to import because we can buy more goods from foreign countries. It becomes more expensive for other countries to buy our goods, and now we're not making as much money from outside of the country, and therefore our consumer demand is going to shrink within because we can't buy as much outdoor because it's cheaper to get our own goods. And so we're just going to be staying and buying our own. That's what I've got it from the book. Agree, disagree there, Nate?
Yeah. And just like when the dollar depreciates, imports will tend to fall and exports rise. In turn, this increases net exports and will stimulate aggregate demand. This is just the aggregate demand of our GDP. We want to sell our goods to other countries. Just like here in change in income abroad, exports went up from other people buying our stuff, which means aggregate demand goes up. But here, exports go down because we're importing more and our dollar's worth more, so no one's buying our goods, right? So if no one's buying our goods, our aggregate demand is also going to go down. So you got to watch that exports. That's the important part of these two, is taking a look at the exports. And these 6 are all the factors that shift aggregate demand. And I'm just going to do a quick summary for you, which I put at the end of my notes. Oh yeah, sweet. Erase that for me. I got a quick summary. Of the factors that increase aggregate demand. So these are only the factors that increase. So what increases it is an increase in wealth. I should say real wealth, I mean. Taking some factors out of it. 2 is a decrease in the real rate of interest. Three, something else that the other one that increases aggregate demand, is optimism about future economic conditions. 4 is a rise in the expected rate of inflation. 5, higher real incomes abroad. 6, a depreciation in the foreign exchange value. So these are important. I put these in your notes because those are all just a summary of an increase. So all you have to do is say the opposite and it's a decrease, right? So a decrease in real wealth decreases aggregate demand. An increase in the real interest rate decreases aggregate demand. Pessimism about future economic conditions decreases demand, right? So that's just a quick summary of what we all went through. Those 6 things are just important. The opposite is going to decrease aggregate demand. And this is what a decrease looks like. You have the real GDP, the price level. We have aggregate demand right here in equilibrium, right? Blue is equilibrium. Any of these factors that happen, these are an increase though, so it would be AD over here. Any of these things happen, it's shifting this aggregate demand to AD1, right? Vice versa for the factors that decrease. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the 6 factors of demand. And now we have supply. Fun stuff. Any questions on this demand stuff before we get into it? Does everyone kind of understand what's going to shift the demand curve? No question's a dumb question. It doesn't matter to me. I'm here to answer them.
What is the second word on number 6?
Number 6, a depreciation. Sorry, I'm left-handed. I can't see what I write. It's a depreciation in the foreign exchange value. Depreciation, yeah. And then appreciation would do the opposite effect. All right. You want to just erase everything and we'll get into supply. Let me see if there's something I want to show them about supply or about this. All right. You want to start with supply?
Sure.
Okay. Or here, I got something.
Alright, here you go.
All right. Sorry. Now I'm going to talk about aggregate supply. There's 2 of these. There's long run, which is abbreviated as LRAS. So when I write that on the board, that's long run aggregate supply. And there's short run, which when I abbreviate that, it's going to be SRAS, short run aggregate supply. We'll start here with long run. What's the long run? Does anyone have a guess? Have you heard it before? Have you talked about it before? Any econ classes? Yeah? Someone want to give me what the long run means? If not, we'll put it in your notes again. Well, the long run, it shows the maximum rate of sustainable output of an economy. Given its current resource base, level of technology, and institutional arrangements. that affects productivity. And these long run shifts, important note, long run shifts move both the LR-AS curve and the short run aggregate supply curve. That's the importance about long run. And I got one definition for short run here. And short run are just these changes that influence current output without altering the economy's long-run capacity. So when these short run shifts of the supply curve, when they shift, they just shift the short run aggregate supply, not the long run aggregate supply. And there's 3 different shifts for each that we can kind of talk about and go over.
First, we're going to just have our baseline. So our long run aggregate supply, like you said, the long run we've met our maximum potential. And so this is why we see our long run aggregate supply as a straight line up and down, because we've reached maximum. So if we're increasing our capabilities at a long run or decreasing, we would see this entire line shift because it's our maximum of what we're producing. And then for our short run aggregate supply, our curve would look something like this. And now let's go through your changes.
Yeah, so for the long run, let's just go over the long run real quick. There's these 3 right here, right? These ones are pretty easy. I don't have a lot about them. But it's the resource base. So in your economy, if you expand your resource base, what's it say? If you expand your capacity for your resource base, that long run average supply is going to increase and shift right. If you cut back capacity, you move left, of course, so you do the opposite direction. And then there's level of technology in your economy. If there's a new technological advancement, let's talk about the iPhone. The iPhone came out, and in our economy, we had our long run average supply there. When the iPhone came out and kind of changed the world, where would long run supply move? Probably shift to the right? Different technological advances help make our economy better and help increase our output which is our real GDP there at the bottom. When a technological advancement comes along and increases our capacity and be able to earn more real GDP, that long run average supply is going to shift to the right. And same with institutional arrangements that affect productivity. These are different policies that the government can institute in a country. And these policies can either expand your long run average supply or decrease it. Do you have anything else on long run?
Hit it.
You can kind of talk about the short run now. Are you guys done writing this stuff in black? Can I erase this one? Or no? Not yet? Okay, that's fine.
Can you leave like the right part?
Yeah. I'll just leave it up for a little longer then. I'll take these back to normal so we can redraw our graphs for short run.
And the reason why I was also adding with the short run was because, like you said, if the long run average supply is getting shifted, then the short run aggregate supply is also getting shifted.
Exactly.
All right. To repeat what he said, this is a major point that the short run shift does not change the long run. So but our first shifter we have is change in resource prices. So
I want to see if they know.
yeah.
So we got resource prices as that first one, and a reduction in these resource prices. What's gonna happen? What's it gonna do? That short run supply, short run aggregate supply, a change in resource prices. Throw it out there. I hate doing the random number generator. Anyone, you're not wrong. If you're wrong, it doesn't matter because we're gonna learn it, right? What's it gonna do? What's a change in resource prices gonna do? Or can you explain to me what it's gonna do, a change in the resource price? If you increase the resource price or reduce it, what's it gonna do to short run aggregate supply? Because you can either increase resource prices or decrease it. Let's reduce resource prices. So we decrease that price of resource prices. The prices go down. What's going to happen to aggregate supply? Your resource prices are down.
I would say increase, but I couldn't really.
Increase.
So where's it going to shift? It would either shift to left or right, right? An increase would be, we're shifted right on the aggregate supply. Our supply is increasing, and that's a right shift, right? And you're correct. But do you know why? Your resource prices are cheaper, right? So what's that going to do? Cheaper to buy supplies, which is what? It's a lower production cost. It doesn't cost that much, right? It's cheap to produce your goods, so then when it's cheap to produce, you're going to produce more, right? And you're producing more, so your supply is increasing. Exactly, there we go. So what's going to happen if you increase the resource price? It's expensive to buy wood or something. What's going to happen? I don't know what we're making, but yeah. It's too expensive to keep your supply that high, so they're just going to limit their supply. And so he can move the supply curve to the right. If we reduce our resource price like we have up there, our supply is going to increase. We're going to move over there. But that doesn't mean, this is why it's a short run though. It doesn't mean that our output of the economy right here is going to change either, right? Because those resource prices the next year might go back up instead of being reduced. So it's not that long-term effect, it's that short-term effect that's changing the resource prices and shifting it that way. Does everyone kind of get that one? And something to note actually on that first one, we can take into consideration. If there's something that creates a lower cost of resources that reflects a long run average supply, so maybe it was a technological advancement, right? You learned how to cut down trees better with some crazy new chainsaw or something, I don't know what it would be. But if it reflects that long run, that's going to change it in the long run, it would also shift the long run. That's one that's important to keep in mind with the change in resource prices and the production costs. If it looks like it's changing in the long run, it'll move in the long run as well. Yeah, you can go on to number 2. That was my only note.
Give you like an example of that, because I think you're right. It's an important thing to mention. Because if we're producing a good and we're able to one day produce it for $1, and then the next day we find a new way of producing that good, and we can now produce it from that day on for the next 50 years for 50 cents. That's a long-term change, even though it's a short run change in your resource price. That's such a permanent change in the way that you're doing things that would also be long run.
Mm-hmm. And now we're back for number 2. We're back to inflation. So the second factor that can shift the supply curve is changes in the expected rate of inflation. We're back on that now. We already talked about inflation. Increase in inflation is increase the price of goods.
Is he using this? Is inflation?
Yeah, that's the sign for inflation if you want to shorten it. So it's expected inflation, right? This is all speculative. If there's an increase in the expected rate of inflation, where is that supply curve going? What did you say? You said decrease? Yeah, why? You're right. Shifts to the left. Supply curve. Inflation is the increase of prices. And we're on the supply curve, right? What would that mean? You got anything? You answered it right. You're on the right trail. Just keep following what you're thinking. Nothing? Just flipped a coin in your head or what? Yeah. No, yeah, that's smart. Yeah, no, you're right. Way to follow your brain. An increase in the expected rate of inflation will reduce the current supply of goods because it costs more, right? That's exactly what you said. You followed it. And thereby shifting the short run supply curve to the left. It's going to decrease supply if we expect that inflation is going to increase, right? And a reduction in the expected rate of inflation shifts it to the right, right? It's the exact opposite.
Number 2, we would see a shift to the left.
We got one more. We got 3. Number 3. Number 3 is called supply shocks, and we need to define that as well. You want to put this one in black ink right there. And a supply shock is an unexpected event that temporarily increases or decreases aggregate supply. What did we talk about earlier in the beginning of class? You answered it in the back, right? kind of goes with unanticipated changes or supply shocks, unforeseen events, right? So what is an example of a supply shock? Could be something good because it's either increasing or decreasing the aggregate supply. Any examples? Supply shock. What's going to decline aggregate supply? Anything in the world, right? Let's do a random number generator. I'm going to do 4 and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, I ended on here. Just random out of my head. What do you think an unexpected event that temporarily increases or decreases aggregate supply, but I want decrease? What's a random event that's going to decrease our supply, right? Anything that come to mind? You got to answer something. If it's wrong, I don't care. Huh? What was that? Price what?
See price levels?
Oh, price levels? That's not an event. That's just price levels, right? So something that's a supply shock is an unexpected event that can happen, right? That either increases our supply or decreases it, doesn't matter. I just made eye contact with you. Lovely, right? What do you think? Increase or decrease? What event?
For an increase, I would say for supply, I would say war. I don't know what decrease.
War would increase the supply?
Actually, more supply, or if there was a natural disaster.
That would what? Natural disaster would what? Supply.
Increase.
What happens in a natural disaster, right? The short run. Say Louisiana gets hit by Hurricane Katrina, right? 2005, I think. What's happening to their supply, that short run supply for anyone in Katrina, right? What happened to their supply? Yeah, it's kind of gone, right? So it decreases. So a natural disaster shifts to the left. So it's going to decrease aggregate supply. Whereas, like we said, drought too. Drought would be a natural disaster. Drought would decrease supply, right? So you got wheat crop, you're a wheat farmer. There's a drought, right, on your fields. And it was an unexpected event. You didn't know there was going to be a drought. Is that going to limit your supply? Yeah, it's going to decrease it by quite some bit. But something that increases is maybe like favorable weather. Maybe you have a good year. You get way more grain than you did. Something wild happens. There's no storms. There's just nice little rainstorms and sunny days. It makes your crop grow and you get a bigger. That's it.
And then the same would be, like we said before, with the shift, there's an increase of temporary price of imported goods. We did the same thing and have supply shock.
So those are your 3. Short run. Is there any questions on those 3? Change in resource prices, we got that one pretty good. Expected inflation rate, we got that one good. And supply shock, we did that one. Any other questions on those? Things that shift the short run. Alright, sweet. I have just the same key summary notes that I did the last time that I can put back up there. The black one's dead, right? Just right over there. I guess I can write it right. Will you erase this?
Yeah.
And we can do one big thing. Let me write this down real quick. Okay. So we have a summary. I should get out of the way. Summary. These are all increases, right? So an increase in long run average supply would be an increase in the supply of resources 2, technology and productivity improvements. Three, institutional changes. That improve efficiency. And those are all increasing in the long run. And then increasing the short run. That would be a fall in resource prices. Makes it cheaper to produce your goods. 2, a fall in expected rate of inflation. And 3, something that's going to increase it is a favorable supply shock. That's a quick summary. You can erase that. And then I think I'm going to put them through and give them 4 different graphs, and we'll shift them real quick. Yeah, if you want to just draw just equilibrium, those 3 lines on 3 different graphs, please. And then I'm going to give them a different thing. Actually, do 4, but just make them equilibrium. And then talk about it. Forgot where I put the cap to this. Oh, okay. All right, any questions on the supply? Now that I have a summary. Those are all increases, so just like I said, if you want to decrease the long run or the short run average supply, an increase in resource prices will make it more expensive to do production costs, which will decrease your short run average supply. These are all just increases on the summary. Just make it opposite and it's a decrease. Let's see here. Let's get into groups real quick. You guys are already kind of just group up. 3 or 4. Get in groups real quick. Sit next to each other. You guys already are. But move together real quick. Wherever you're at, find a group. Doesn't matter where you are. Real quick while we do this, because I want to get this done and then we can leave. We got 10 minutes, right? You guys get out at 1? Okay, we got 10 minutes to do this real quick. Yeah. Yeah, I can still fit on the next. Yeah, no, you're good, you're good. Sorry, I was gonna say, but you're good. All right, in your groups real quick. I got 4 graphs up here. We got the first graph.
You will need to turn this into. So
There's,
make sure you.
yeah, let's turn this in for attendance. Let's do that. Yeah, I like that. It's because I need to take attendance, and that'll be the best way to take attendance because you write my name on your piece of paper. Sorry, tough cookies.
What am I drawing the graphs?
On a separate sheet of paper, you got graph 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can recopy those graphs. It's just equilibrium, long run, aggregate demand, and short run. Aggregate supply. We got price level, and we got real GDP at the bottom. All right. So yeah, I would draw all 4 because it's 4 different problems and 4 different shifters. So here, it's pretty quick. It takes you 5 seconds. You go in 2, 2, 4. It's 5 lines. don't come at me for 5 lines. All right. On the first graph, there's a drought. Please give me your shift. On the second graph, people are optimistic about the economy. Give me the shift. There's a technological advancement in number 3. Give me that shift. And in 4, you're a wooden toy creator and wood gets cheaper. You can just do small little graphs. It doesn't have to be anything big, it doesn't have to be artistic. You can fit 4 of these graphs on a piece of paper, and there's 4 different shifts here. You already wrote them down today. We took notes. Show me which way they're going to shift and what it's going to look like. What are you guys thinking? You thinking? I like that. All right, I'm gonna come back to you guys. Let's see you start to draw the graph.
Drought roulette. Yes, fix it right.
You guys got an idea where they're shifting?
Because I was preparing for the story. I woke up and it's perfect.
Yeah. You might be shifting one thing, you might be shifting all.
Any of these you could be moving any of them.
And
That's the
wood
point.
gets cheaper.
Have
It's like
real experience shifting any of them.
wood toy thing
So-
market, and wood gets cheaper.
But all I got was
So you put at the top market, you put wood market, or wood toy market, and then wood gets, that just made the market. Just so it kind of makes sense in your head about what to do. I just made it up on the spot, to be honest with you. It says people are optimistic about the economy.
We can ask.
What's up?
Are we supposed to be moving a short run or long run?
Depends, man. What's the movement on which one? You know what I mean? So when long run moves, remember when I said this in the beginning, when long run moves, short run's moving with it. So if one of those is a long run, short run is also increasing at the same time. But if it's only a short run increase, only the short run's gonna increase, right? The long run's gonna stay the same. But long run and short run move together. Whenever long run moves, the short run's following right behind it, right? Oh my gosh, I almost said the answer I was gonna say. Never mind. How are you guys doing? What are we doing? Drought? What's happening when a drought?
We moved that to the left.
Supply shock, right? You move supply to the left. I like that. Supply 0, supply 1. Yeah, nice. So when people are optimistic about the economy, what's happening there?
It goes to the right.
What Which one? You can say it goes. Three lines over there. People are optimistic. Ooh, that sounds right. I think I would probably do that. Yeah, you're increasing demand, right?
I'm saying like the supply is like this one.
Get to drawing, sister.
All right, we got 4 more minutes, so I'm gonna give you 2 more minutes to crack it out. We'll talk about our answers. For the drought? Which one is that? Which one is that though? What 3 factors I'm talking about? What 3 short run factors was it out of the 3? It's like the one I just read. It's supply shock. Drought. Unforeseen event. Yeah, unforeseen event happened. A drought. It's going to increase short run aggregate supply. How are we doing again? Good? What did you put on the 3rd one? The 3rd one's tricky, right? What's the 3rd one? Yeah, the 3rd one's tricky. Why? What is it? What shift is it? Let's talk about that. Okay, yeah. Give that. Which one was it? Was it a short run one? What were the 3 long? What were the 3 long run factors? Right? What were those? I don't know. Well, it's up to you here. What? You took notes, right? Let's go to the long run supply, right? Which one is it? What are those 3 changes in the long run? Resource base, level of technology, institutional arrangements, right? So what's number 3 say, right? Level of technology. What happens when long run moves? What also goes with it? Yeah, so I don't know, maybe. It's tricky. Damn.
What I look like.
How are you guys doing? I don't want to keep you guys the whole time. We got to explain. All right, 2 minutes. It's up. Sorry, we'll go over. Droughts. What's happening? What is it? What is it? What's happening?
The shock.
Yes. What shock? Supply shock, right? So what happens in a supply shock? It doesn't always, right? Supply shocks both. Could be something good, right? Favorable weather, something like that. But this one is bad. Context, drought. You're a farmer, drought. So your short run aggregate supply, since it's just a little shock that's not long run, it's gonna go to the left, right? You're gonna shift that leftward. So did we all get that one?
Yes.
Nice. Number 2, give it to me. What's happening here? People are optimistic about the economy. What's gonna happen?
Increase, they're thinking it's on the left.
Mm-hmm.
So everything, short run will shift to the right, if I'm right, and then long run shift there.
It's a what shifter though? People are optimistic. It's a shifter. We talked about in the first 6, right? It's a AD shifter, which is what? What's AD?
Aggregate demand.
Aggregate demand, right? It's an aggregate demand shifter. So we're going to shift the demand curve, right? People are optimistic. We shift that demand curve to the right because people want to invest, and there we go. And then we got a new equilibrium right over here. Number 3, technological advancement. This one's tricky. I helped this group, so don't say anything until give me like 30 seconds. Technological advancement. What's that?
Long run.
Yeah, long run average supply, right? So what happens with that? Shifts it to the right, but what's it bring with it? Yeah, it brings the short run, right? Just like I told these ladies right up here. You're moving the long run and the short run are both shifting and increasing. And so then it meets right here on the new equilibrium. And then we got, what's this one? What'd I do? Oh, I said the wooden toy creator market and your wood gets cheaper. What happens there? Yeah, to where though? Which one? Which one's shifting right? You're right. You guys are both right. Yeah, short run to the right. Perfect. Resource prices are cheaper, which means you can create more wooden toys. Your supply goes up, yeah? Thank you for having a wonderful class.
Please drop those off at the front with your name on them too.
I'm grading so hard. I'm just kidding, that was just for my attendance purposes. Well, we'll see you guys tomorrow. We're taking over for us again. Tomorrow we're gonna draw more graphs and
No grass, no grass.
oh, no graphs.